$2. That is what Clara Santos held in her trembling fingers at 3:22 in the morning, and the bill was crumpled like something that had been prayed over and discarded. The checkered floor of Rose's diner stretched out beneath her orthopedic shoes, black and white squares reflecting the dying neon signs that buzzed with the sound of electricity slowly surrendering. She counted the bills again. 1. 2. $2 to her name, and 7 days to produce 200,000 or lose Micah forever. The envelope in her apron pocket crackled with each breath she took. Final notice, it said in letters thick as a threat. Final notice, as if the previous dozen notices had not been final enough. As if the universe needed to be very clear that she was running out of time, running out of luck, running out of every option that existed between survival and collapse. The diner was empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain hammering against the windows. Summer thunder had torn the sky open an hour ago, and it had not stopped since. Clara wiped down the counter for the 14th time that night, moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned long ago not to think about what her hands were doing. Think about the hands, and you think about what you cannot buy with them. Think about what you cannot fix with them. Think about a 4-year-old boy in a borrowed room in his grandmother's apartment, waiting for an aunt who barely makes enough to feed them both. She didn't think about Micah. She couldn't afford to. The door chimed. Clara looked up, expecting nothing. After midnight, Rose's diner attracted only lost people and desperate people, and sometimes both at once. But the man who stumbled through the door at 3:23 was different. He moved like someone accustomed to taking up space in the world, even as rain soaked through an expensive coat that probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. Blood darkened the left side of his white shirt. His dark eyes, sharp as glass, scanned the empty diner and then settled on her face. He was tall, broad-shouldered in the way that came from deliberate training, not accident. His jaw was sharp enough to cut, and a thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like a line drawn by something cruel. He was breathing heavily, but his hand was steady as he gripped the counter. Clara did not ask questions. She had learned a long time ago that questions were a luxury that poor people could not afford. "Sit," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I will get the first aid kit." He Saturday. She moved through the diner with practiced efficiency, pulling down the white box from the cabinet behind the register, the same box she used when she burned her hands on hot oil or cut her fingers on broken dishes. She returned to the counter and began to unwrap his shirt with steady hands that did not shake, though her heart was moving like a caged animal behind her ribs. The wound was a gunshot, clean entry, bleeding steadily but not catastrophically. He watched her work without speaking. She wrapped the wound tight with clean dish towels from beneath the counter, pressing them against the blood, her hands moving with the competence of someone who had learned medicine from desperation and YouTube videos. "Press here," she told him, guiding his hand to hold the pressure. She moved to the industrial sink and washed her hands, watching the pink water spiral down the drain. When she turned back, he was still watching her. "What is your name?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. "Clara," she said. "Clara Santos." He studied her face like he was memorizing something. Like her name was important. Like she was important, which she was not and never would be. She made him coffee. Black, no sugar, the way he did not ask for it, but somehow she knew he wanted it. She found clean bandages in the first aid kit and worked to secure the dish towels against his side, careful not to touch him more than necessary. His breathing steadied as she worked. The color began to return to his face. "Thank you, Clara," he said, and those words carried weight that made her look up from her work. She nodded. Said nothing. Returned to the counter and began wiping it down again, the same motions, the same meditation. She did not look when he reached into his jacket. Did not watch when he pulled out a money clip. Did not see him place $500 bills beneath the coffee cup like it was nothing. Like $500 was not the difference between eviction and one more month. Like $500 would not keep Micah in his school. Like $500 meant anything to someone who could bleed in a diner at 3 in the morning and still move like he owned the world. He left at 3:28, the door chiming quietly behind him. Clara cleaned his cup. Found the bills. Her hands moved to her mouth, and for the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to cry. Just for a moment. Just enough to break. She folded the bills and placed them in her apron pocket, next to the final notice letter. $500. It was a beginning. It was not nearly enough. But it was a beginning. She did not know his name. She did not know that 30 minutes later, everything would change. At 3:58 in the morning, the sound came first. Engines. Multiple engines, heavy and deliberate, pulling up to the curb outside Rose's diner. Then came the silence that follows power when it arrives. The kind of silence that happens when a room understands it is no longer in control of itself. The door opened. 50 men in black suits flooded into the diner like water finding cracks. They filled every booth, lined the walls, stood by the windows with their hands folded in front of them in that particular way that meant violence was not a possibility but a resource they had brought with them and were choosing not to use. Yet, their shoes were polished to reflections. Their ties were silk. Their presence transformed the rundown diner into something else entirely, something smaller and more fragile. Carlo appeared first. Silver at the temples, dark eyes that had seen things that made most people's suffering look like complaints. He approached the counter with the measured pace of a man accustomed to being obeyed before he spoke. "Mr. Caruso would like a word," he said, and he placed a white envelope on the counter between them. His voice was like gravel, like something that had been broken and had learned to exist anyway. Clara's hands went still. The man from earlier stood in the doorway, the rain still clinging to his coat, the blood still dark against his white shirt where it had soaked through the makeshift bandage she had given him. He was watching her face, and something in his expression said that he already knew what she was thinking. That he could read the fear moving through her like a current because he had learned to read fear the way other people read books. "Mr. Caruso," Carlo continued, and he gestured toward the man in the doorway, "would like to thank you personally for your assistance this evening." The world tilted. Clara understood, in that moment, that the man she had bandaged without hesitation, without questions, without asking for anything in return except that he sit down and let her work, was not simply a man. He was the kind of man who arrived with 50 others. He was the kind of man whose gratitude came wrapped in black suits and expensive shoes. He was the kind of man whose world was so different from hers that she had crossed into it without even knowing the border existed. She had helped Salvatore Caruso, the most powerful Mafia boss in Boston. The man whose name appeared in whispered conversations that stopped when regular people entered rooms. The man who owned pieces of the city the way other people owned furniture. And what she did not know, what no one in that moment could have predicted, was that this act of kindness, this simple bandaging of a stranger's wound, had just written her name into a ledger where debts are paid not in money but in blood. Where protection comes with a price she could not imagine. Where the most dangerous man she would ever meet was about to become the only thing standing between her and the darkness she had been running from her entire life. Carlo extended the envelope further. "Mr. Caruso would like you to have this," he said. Clara took the envelope with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. If this story hits you, please drop a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes tomorrow. Every like, every share, every subscription is what keeps us creating stories like this one. Now let us go back. Let us go back to where this all began, to the moment Clara Santos's world was already collapsing, long before 50 men in black suits walked through the door of a diner at 3:58 in the morning. Let us return to 2 days earlier. Let us return to when she was still invisible. 2 days before 50 men arrived at Rose's diner, Clara Santos stood alone behind the counter at 3:22 in the morning, counting money that was not money at all. 2 crumpled dollar bills. 3 quarters. A Canadian penny someone had left as a joke. She arranged them in a line across the worn Formica counter, watching the neon open sign flicker and buzz above her reflection in the darkened window. That was it. $2.78. For 16 hours of work. for standing on orthopedic shoes that had worn through at the heel, for smiling at people who treated her like furniture, for refilling coffee cups until the smell of burnt grounds had seeped so deep into her hair that even her pillowcase smelled like a diner at closing time. The checkered floor beneath her feet was pale from decades of foot traffic, black and white squares worn smooth in certain spots where generations of waitresses had stood in that exact position. The kitchen was dark. The fryer had cooled an hour ago, leaving behind that thick, impossible smell, grease and burnt coffee and something older, something that had baked into the walls over 40 years of service. She was the only one here now. The only person in the entire diner on a humid Boston night in August, the kind of night where the air itself feels like it is holding its breath before a storm. Clara reached into her apron pocket. Her hands were shaking. The letter was folded into thirds, worn soft at the creases from being opened and refolded so many times in the past 3 days that the paper was starting to tear. Final notice. Those words were printed in red ink across the envelope, angry and absolute. She had read this letter 47 times. She knew every word. She knew the exact amount printed in the box marked total due, $200,000. She knew the date printed in smaller type, 7 days remaining. She pulled out her phone and opened the calculator app. She did the math again, even though she had done it so many times that her fingers moved without her thinking. Hourly wage, $9. Hours worked per week, 80, sometimes 90 when someone called in sick and she stayed until breakfast rush. Her take-home after taxes was approximately $612 per week. If she took every single dollar and applied it to the debt, it would take her 253 weeks to pay it off. That was 4.8 years. But she did not have 4.8 years. She had 7 days. And in those 7 days, she had to do something that was mathematically, physically, spiritually impossible. Somewhere in a foster home 12 miles away, Micah was sleeping in clothes that did not fit him. A boy who had watched his mother burn. A boy who had clutched a photograph of her face in the confusion of sirens and smoke. A boy who now belonged to the state of Massachusetts because Clara Santos did not make enough money to be considered a suitable guardian. Because grief and love were not listed on the income verification forms. Because the law required $200,000 in savings and proof of stable housing and a background check that came back clean, and she had exactly none of those things. The foster home paid for his bed and his food. But it could not pay for the lawyer who would fight the state. It could not pay for the therapy he needed. It could not pay for the custody hearing in 6 days where a judge would look at Clara's bank account, which currently held $17.43, and sign papers that would split her family apart forever. She had saved Micah's life once. She could not save it again. Clara folded the letter and placed it back in her pocket. Then she counted the money one more time, as if 3/4 and $2 had somehow multiplied while she was not looking. They had not. The Canadian penny rolled off the counter and fell to the checkered floor with a sound so quiet it seemed to mock her. She left the money on the counter for Rosie and clocked out on the ancient machine by the register, the same machine that had been there when her mother worked at this diner, back before Clara was born, back when her mother still had her teeth and did not take pills for the shaking in her hands. Her mother had worked doubles too. Her mother had smiled at rude customers too. Her mother had died at 53, and Clara sometimes wondered if her mother had ever stood at this exact counter counting $2.80 and thought about drowning herself in the river. The night air hit her face like a slap. August in Boston was not cool. The humidity wrapped around her like wet cotton. Her car was parked at the edge of the lot, a 1998 Honda Civic with 239,000 miles on the odometer and a check engine light that had been glowing orange for 6 months. She slid into the driver's seat and sat for a moment before turning the key. The engine coughed. Then it caught. She pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the highway. The city was quiet at this hour, that strange, fragile quiet that happened between the night shift and the morning delivery trucks. A few cars passed her. A bus at a red light. The occasional taxi heading toward the airport. The radio played softly. She was not really listening. She was thinking about the mathematics of desperation. She was thinking about the fact that Micah would be 7 years old next month, and she had promised him a birthday cake, and she did not know how to tell him that the only birthday present she could afford was another night in a foster home that was not home. The highway stretched out ahead of her. She had been driving this same route for 4 years, ever since her sister moved to Boston with Micah. 42 minutes from the diner to the apartment building where she rented a room. 42 minutes of highway that cut through industrial areas and past warehouses where nothing good happened late at night. The first drops of rain hit the windshield at 3:51 in the morning. Then more came. Not gentle. Not a light summer drizzle. But a sudden, violent downpour that came out of nowhere, as if the sky had finally decided that the heat and humidity had lasted long enough. The rain hammered the windshield so hard that the wipers could not keep up. Clara leaned forward, squinting through the deluge, trying to see the road ahead. The car sputtered. Just once. Just a small cough that would have been nothing under normal circumstances. But Clara felt her stomach drop anyway. She eased off the accelerator and let the car coast while the rain continued to assault the windshield. The sputtering came again. Then once more. Then the engine died. She was on the highway in the middle of a thunderstorm, in a car that had finally, mercifully, given up on the idea of running. The rain drummed against the roof. Her hands gripped the steering wheel. She turned the key. The engine groaned but would not start. She tried again. Nothing. Just that dead, hopeless sound of a starter motor that no longer had the will to turn. Clara sat in the darkness, in the small circle of light from the dashboard, while the storm raged around her. She should call a mechanic. She should call a tow truck. But tow trucks cost money. Mechanics cost money. Everything cost money, and she had $2.78 to her name, and the universe, it seemed, was intent on taking even that away from her. She laid her forehead against the steering wheel and thought about drowning. Not in the river. In debt. In the system. In all the ways that the world had decided she was not good enough, not worthy enough, not enough in general. The rain continued. The thunder rolled across the sky, low and distant and then suddenly close enough to rattle the windows. Lightning lit up the highway in white snapshots, empty road, dark fields, the shapes of buildings far away. Between the flashes came absolute darkness. This was when the headlights appeared. At first, Clara thought it was a single car. But then she heard engines. Multiple engines. The sound of vehicles moving slowly through the rain, moving deliberately, moving like they had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. She sat up. 3 black SUVs materialized out of the darkness, moving through the downpour like sharks through dark water. They slowed as they approached her broken car. The lead vehicle pulled alongside her, and the rear window began to roll down. A man's face appeared in the window. He was older, maybe 60, with silver at his temples and a scar that ran from his left eye down to his jaw, pale and precise like a designer's signature. He wore a dark suit and an expression that suggested he was looking at something that had died weeks ago. When he spoke, his voice was thick and deliberate, each word placed carefully like someone laying down cards in a game where the stakes were incomprehensible. "Your car is broken," he said. Not a question. A statement. Clara's mouth had gone dry. She did not answer. She did not move. She did not even breathe. "My name is Carlo," the man said. "And you are going to come with us." The rain hammered against the windshield so hard Clara could barely see the highway stretching ahead. Her wipers beat frantically, squeaking with each pass, and the defroster was fighting a losing battle against the steam rising from her breath. 3:47 in the morning. The dashboard clock glowed green in the darkness. She had been awake for 19 hours, and her hands shook on the steering wheel from exhaustion and cold. The final notice lay on the passenger seat, its edges curling slightly from the moisture seeping in through the broken door seal. $200,000 in 7 days or she lost custody of Micah. 7 days. That was all the time between her and becoming a woman who lost everything. The engine coughed. Once. Twice. Then nothing but the sound of rain and the clicking of hazard lights as her car coasted to the shoulder and died. She sat in the darkness trying to turn the key. Nothing. Dead battery, or alternator failure, or both. The kind of broken that couldn't be fixed with patience or prayer. She had $2 in her wallet and a phone with 3% battery. No one to call. No one who would answer at this hour anyway. The borrowed blanket Micah slept under was waiting at the foster home. The social worker's appointment was tomorrow at noon. And her car had chosen this exact moment to betray her. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty field stretching in every direction. In that white snapshot, Clara could see how alone she was. How completely, utterly alone. Between the flashes came absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that made it hard to remember that morning existed at all. Then she heard engines. At first she thought it was a single vehicle. But the sound multiplied, deep and deliberate, moving through the rain with unmistakable purpose. She watched in the mirror as headlights emerged from the downpour behind her, massive and bright, cutting through the storm like beams through an ocean. 3 of them. Black SUVs moving slowly, moving like they had all the time in the world and nowhere particular to be. They slowed as they approached. The lead vehicle pulled alongside her broken car, and the back window began its descent. The sound of the electric motor humming filled the silence. A man's face appeared. Older, maybe 60, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar running precise as a knife cut from his left eye down to his jaw. He wore an expensive suit even in this storm, and his eyes held the particular coldness of someone accustomed to people obeying him without hesitation. When he spoke, his voice was like thunder rolling across a distant sky, solid and inevitable. "Your car is broken," he said. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't answer. Didn't move. The rain drummed against her roof, and she could smell the wet asphalt mixing with something like cologne and rain-soaked fabric from the open window. "My name is Salvatore Caruso," he continued, each word placed deliberately like someone laying down cards in a game where everything was at stake. "And you're going to come with us." She should have said no. Every survival instinct screaming through her exhausted body should have made her refuse. But Salvatore Caruso didn't ask questions. His men were already stepping out of the other vehicles, doors opening without hesitation, the kind of movement that suggested they'd done this 1,000 times before. And Clara, standing in the ashes of her own life, had nothing left to fear. She grabbed the photograph from her visor, the only thing she'd saved from the fire, a picture of her mother and sister before everything burned, and stepped out into the rain. The diner was dark when they arrived, just after 4 in the morning. Clara's keys shook in her hand as she unlocked the front door, and Salvatore's men moved inside like they owned the place, sitting in booths, running their hands along the vinyl seats, their expensive suits and gold watches impossibly out of place among the faded checkered floor and coffee-stained menus. Salvatore sat at the counter. Clara moved on instinct, reaching for the coffee pot before he asked, pouring a cup with hands that had performed this action 10,000 times. The familiar motion steadied something in her chest. This she knew how to do. This was solid ground. "Thank you," he said, and something in his tone suggested he meant it for more than just the coffee. They sat in silence for 6 minutes. Clara knew it was 6 because she watched the clock on the wall, the red second hand sweeping around and around, marking time. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song. Then the front door burst open. 2 men rushed in, rain-soaked and urgent, supporting a third between them. The man they carried was bleeding, his shirt torn where a bullet had found him, his face grey with pain. Clara recognized him instantly from photographs, Salvatore's cousin, Giacomo. "Surgery," Salvatore said, not a question, looking at the bleeding man with the clinical assessment of someone used to evaluating damage. But Clara was already moving. She'd worked in diners for 8 years. She knew how to handle injuries, burns from the fryer, knife cuts from prep work, medical situations that required something faster than an ambulance because ambulances took 40 minutes to reach the highway. She pulled her first aid kit from behind the counter, the one she kept for kitchen emergencies, and approached Giacomo without hesitation, without asking questions she already knew wouldn't be answered. "We need to stop the bleeding first," she said, pressing clean towels against the wound. "Apply pressure and keep his arm elevated." The bullet didn't hit an artery or he'd already be unconscious. She worked with steady hands, her exhaustion falling away in favor of something sharper, more essential. Salvatore watched her from the counter, and in his eyes something shifted, some calculation changing in real time. By the time the sun crept over the Boston skyline, turning the sky from black to purple to orange, Salvatore's men filled the diner like they'd always been there. Carlo and Gino stood at the door, their suits still damp from the storm. Others occupied the booths, drinking coffee. Clara kept refilling, their presence transforming the shabby space into something that felt dangerous and alive. Salvatore sat across from Clara in the corner booth, the early light catching the planes of his face, the scar visible like a permanent reminder of survival. He slid an envelope across the table. "What is this?" Clara didn't touch it. "Payment," Salvatore said. "For saving my cousin. For asking no questions. For helping someone who was clearly outside the law without hesitation or judgment." Clara stared at the envelope. "I'm a waitress. I help people. It's what I do. Most people freeze. Most people calculate their own safety first. You didn't." His voice remained steady, but something dangerous moved beneath the surface. "I've spent my life watching people, Clara. Studying them. Learning who breaks and who holds. You held. Why would you do this for me?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'm nobody." "That's exactly why," Salvatore said. And there was something in his expression that suggested he understood exactly what it meant to be nobody. To have less than nothing. To stand in ashes and wonder how to rebuild. "Open it." Her hands moved before her mind caught up. Inside was a stack of bills. Hundreds. 50 of them. $5,000. She counted again, her hands trembling. 10,000. 20. $200,000, Salvatore said quietly. "The amount on the debt collector's letter you left on your car seat." Clara's breath caught. She should have been surprised that he'd seen the letter. Should have felt violated or frightened. Instead she felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut since the night the fire took everything. "I can't take this," she whispered. "You can. You will." Salvatore leaned back in the booth, completely at ease despite the enormity of what he'd just done. "Consider it payment for services rendered. For your cousin's life. For the blood you stopped from flowing." She pulled out the final notice again, her hands visibly shaking now. The number jumped at her like a predator. $200,000. Custody restored. Micah wouldn't go into the system. Wouldn't spend his childhood in a series of foster homes. Wouldn't become another invisible child. "Why?" she asked again. "You don't know me." "I know enough." Salvatore's eyes held hers across the checkered table, the diner suddenly feeling like the smallest room in the world. "I lost my father when I was 16. They shot him in front of me. Made me watch. I spent the next 40 years building an empire on blood and vengeance." He paused. "I'd like to spend whatever time I have left building something on trust instead." Carlo approached their booth, his expression carefully neutral. "Boss, your nephew is here." Robert just pulled up. The door swung open and Robert Hargrove walked in like he'd always belonged in the diner, like he'd always belonged anywhere. Mid-30s, expensive suit, the kind of entitled confidence that comes from never being told no. His eye scanned the booth, and when they found Clara, they lingered with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Uncle," Robert said, sliding uninvited into the booth beside Salvatore. "Heard about the trouble last night. Glad you're safe." "We're fine," Salvatore said without warmth. Robert's gaze remained on Clara. "And who is this?" Clara Santos. Salvatore's voice carried an edge. She saved Giacomo's life. How remarkable, Robert said, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Clara, coffee. Black. Clara moved to pour it, and she felt Robert's gaze tracking her every motion, cataloguing, calculating, deciding something about her that she couldn't quite articulate. When she returned to the booth, he continued to watch her with an expression that suggested she'd made an enemy without understanding why. After Robert left, Carlo approached again. That was a mistake, boss. Your nephew. Salvatore said nothing, but something cold moved through his eyes. 3 hours later, Clara stood in a parking lot outside the foster home where Micah was staying, a small boy who was forgetting his mother's voice, who slept better when no one was yelling. She held his hand, and they walked slowly toward the car, savoring every second of the supervised visit that was all the system would allow. A sleek Mercedes pulled alongside them. A woman emerged, 50s, ice-blonde hair, the kind of wealth worn like armor. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned in her life. Her eyes assessed Clara in one sweeping glance and seemed to find her wanting. Clara Santos, the woman said. Her voice was polished, without accent, without nationality. Just pure refinement delivered like a blade. I'm Cordelia Blackwood. I've known Salvatore Caruso for 20 years. Invested in his businesses. Made him respectable. Clara pulled Micah closer. The woman's presence felt like a predator circling. I want to be direct, Cordelia continued. Women like you, desperate and tragic and convenient, they come and go. But you don't belong in his world. She extended a business card. When this ends badly, and it will end badly, call me. I help women like you disappear quietly. She turned and walked back to the Mercedes, her perfume lingering like a warning, like poison in the air. But what Clara didn't understand yet was that Cordelia had already begun making calls, digging into every corner of Clara's past, preparing to pull it all into the light and burn it publicly. 2 days after Cordelia Blackwood walked away from Clara's car, the diner's fluorescent lights hummed their nightly song at 2 in the morning. The checkered floor gleamed under harsh white light. Rain hammered the windows in waves, each gust rattling the panes like someone demanding entry. Clara wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere. The foreclosure letter sat folded in her apron pocket, the paper worn soft from being touched too many times. 48 hours until the deadline. 3 days until the custody hearing. The bell above the door chimed. 4 men entered. Not the regulars who came for coffee at 3 a.m. Not Salvatore's men, who moved with a certain controlled grace. These men wore dark suits that fit poorly, their shoulders hunched against the rain. The leader was broad-jawed, maybe 35, with a scar running from his left eye down toward his collar. Eyes that looked at Clara like she was inventory to be counted. They didn't sit. They surrounded her at the counter, blocking both exits. Clara's hand tightened on her dish rag. The fabric was already damp from sweat. The scarred man leaned forward until she could smell cigarettes and cologne on his breath. Clara Santos, he said, and the way he said her name made it sound like an accusation. Mr. Robert Hargrove appreciates what you did for his uncle. That was kind. That was good. He smiled. It looked like a scar opening. But you're getting confused about your place in this arrangement. Clara stepped back. Her spine met the edge of the register. Trapped. I don't know what you're talking about. You're not Uncle Salvatore's concern, the man continued, as if she hadn't spoken. You never were. You're Robert's now. Mr. Hargrove takes care of family assets. He's generous with the people he claims. I'm not anyone's asset. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. One of the other men laughed, a sound like broken glass. The scarred man's hand reached across the counter and grabbed her wrist. His fingers were cold. His thumb pressed into the inside of her arm, right where the pulse jumped. You have 48 hours to accept Mr. Hargrove's dinner invitation, he said. Have dinner with him. Be grateful. Be available. It's very simple. Clara jerked her wrist away. The motion was instinctive, desperate. Get out. Now. The man straightened. He exchanged a glance with his companions. They all smiled. One more thing, he said, and his voice dropped lower, became something that sounded like a prayer said backward. That nephew of yours. Micah. 7 years old, stays at the Riverside foster home, sleeps in the blue room on the 2nd floor. Accidents happen to kids in foster care, Clara. They wander off. They get lost. Sometimes they don't come home. The world tilted. Clara gripped the counter to keep herself upright. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like something dying slowly. If you touch him. You'll do what? The man asked. You're nobody. You have $2 in your pocket and 48 hours. Mr. Hargrove just wants dinner. They left the way they came, their footsteps echoing across the checkered floor. The door chimed. Rain swallowed the sound of their car starting. Clara stood alone behind the counter, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip them together to keep them still. At 6:16 a.m., Clara woke to her phone vibrating against her pillow. Then again. And again. The notifications came so fast they blurred together. She sat up, her heart already racing. The screen showed 17 messages. 32 missed calls. Her hands felt numb as she scrolled. Her stomach dropped. The local news station's website had a headline that felt like a physical blow: local woman's shocking manipulation of Boston crime boss exposed. There was a photo. Her photo. The one from 3 years ago when she still smiled at the camera. Next to it, a mugshot. Not hers. Her sister's. The shoplifting charge from a decade ago, from before everything fell apart, before the fire took everything. Clara clicked the play button with trembling fingers. Cordelia Blackwood sat across from the news anchor, perfectly composed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent. Her ice-blonde hair didn't move when she turned her head. I've known Salvatore Caruso for 20 years, Cordelia was saying. Invested in his businesses, helped make him respectable in this city. What I'm seeing now concerns me deeply. The anchor leaned forward. The woman in question, Clara Santos, she's a waitress. She works at a diner, Cordelia said, her tone suggesting the word diner was synonymous with moral corruption. She serves coffee for $4 an hour. Then she saw an opportunity. A powerful man. A man known for his generosity. A man with a soft spot for families in distress. The screen switched to photos. Clara at the diner. Clara leaving the hospital after visiting Micah. Clara's apartment building, which looked like something about to collapse. Cordelia's voice continued over the images like a knife through silk. This woman used a sick child as leverage, Cordelia said. She engineered a situation where she could appear sympathetic, vulnerable, in need of rescue. She knew Salvatore Caruso couldn't refuse. And now she's woven herself into his life, his business, his family. Women like this, desperate and tragic and convenient, they come and go. But the damage they do to powerful men, to their empires, to their judgment, that damage lasts. The anchor asked a follow-up question. Cordelia answered with surgical precision. Someone needs to protect Mr. Caruso from exploitation. That's all I'm trying to do. The segment ended. The comments began. The shares. Within an hour, the hashtag was trending. By noon, Clara's face was everywhere. Articles speculated. People she'd never met weighed in with certainty about her character, her motives, her morality. At 12:19 p.m., her landlord called. I've seen the news, he said without preamble. This kind of publicity, it's not good for the building's reputation. We need to talk about your lease. At 1:15 p.m., the diner's owner called. Take some time off. Let this blow over. Can't have cameras outside my restaurant. Bad for business. At 2:53 p.m., The foster agency called. Emergency review. They'd seen the news. There were questions about Micah's placement in her care. Could Clara come in tomorrow? They needed to discuss some concerns. She hung up without answering. Rain was falling when evening came, the kind of rain that seemed to come from nowhere, that fell without end. Clara stood on her apartment balcony, 6 stories up, her uniform still damp from the diner's closing shift. The city spread below her like something drowning. Lights flickered on one by one as darkness came down. The rain soaked through her clothes. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. She held the photograph. 3 Christmases ago. Her sister's arm around Micah, who was only 4 then and still believed the world was safe. Clara stood beside them, actually smiling. Actually believing that things could get better. That love could be enough. That family meant something that money couldn't destroy. The mathematics of her life was impossible. $2 in her pocket. $200,000 owed in 48 hours. 0 chance of custody if her reputation was destroyed. 0 chance of survival if Robert Hargrove decided to take what he wanted. 0 chance of keeping Micah safe if she couldn't fight back. She thought about how easy it would be to let go. To stop fighting. To accept that some people were born to have nothing, to lose everything, to end with nothing. The rain felt like an answer. The darkness felt like an invitation. Her phone buzzed. The foster home. A message with an image attached. She opened it with numb fingers. Micah's drawing. Crayon on paper. 2 stick figures holding hands, one labeled Clara, the other labeled Emmy. The figures were bright yellow against blue sky. There was a sun in the corner, big and smiling. Below the image, text from the caseworker, Micah drew this today during art time. He kept asking if you were coming back. He misses you very much. Clara stood in the rain, the photograph in one hand, the phone showing her nephew's drawing in the other. Every muscle in her body wanted to break. Instead, she walked inside. Dried off. Changed clothes. And with shaking fingers, dialed the only number that had ever meant safety. Salvatore answered on the first ring. Clara. She didn't say hello. She told him everything. The threats about Micah. Cordelia's public execution of her reputation. The deadline. The custody hearing. The mathematical impossibility of survival. Her voice cracked exactly twice. She didn't let herself cry. When she finished, silence held the line between them. She heard him breathing. She heard him thinking. "Give me 6 hours," he said. 12 hours later, Robert Hargrove was alone in his penthouse office overlooking Boston Harbor when the lights went out. Not a power failure. A choice. Emergency lights didn't activate because Salvatore's men had disabled them before entering. The darkness was complete, the kind of darkness that made breathing difficult. His phone was dead. His door opened soundlessly. 12 men in black moved through the blackness like something that belonged there. Tactical precision. Each one covering an exit, securing a perimeter. The lights came back on. Robert stood from his desk, hands raised instinctively, his face draining of color. Salvatore Caruso filled the doorway. Carlo and Gino stood behind him, their faces carved from stone. Salvatore wore a charcoal suit that hung perfectly on his broad shoulders. His scar seemed to deepen in the fluorescent light. "Uncle," Robert whispered. "You threatened her." Salvatore's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight of it filled every corner of the room. "You sent your men to her workplace. You tried to claim what isn't yours to claim." Robert's hand shook. She's nobody, she's under my protection." Salvatore took one step forward. Robert stumbled backward. "That makes her everything." Robert tried to run. He actually tried. Carlo moved with devastating efficiency, blocking the path. Robert collided with his chest and fell. He scrambled backward on his hands, breathing in panic gasps, looking like a cornered animal that had finally understood it was trapped. "I'm family," Robert pleaded. "I'm your blood." "No." Salvatore's voice sounded like the closing of a coffin. "You're not." His men produced documents. Files. Evidence. The skimming from the legitimate businesses. The side deals. The betrayals. Photos of offshore accounts. Emails between Robert and Cordelia planning to frame Clara, to divide Salvatore's enterprises while he was distracted. "FBI gets this in 1 hour," Salvatore said flatly. "Or you disappear. You leave Boston tonight. You never use the Caruso name again. You never contact Clara Santos. You never speak her name in a way she might hear. You choose exile or ruin. Choose." Robert chose exile. He begged. He broke. They gave him a car and 40 minutes to pack. By midnight, he was gone. Across the city, Cordelia Blackwood was hosting her annual charity gala at Boston's finest hotel when federal agents walked through the ballroom doors. The crowd parted like water. Cameras flashed, society pages always covered Cordelia's events. An agent approached the microphone. "Cordelia Blackwood, you're under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering." The room erupted. Cordelia's face went white. Her hand flew to her pearls. "This is absurd. I'm a respected—" "You've been running a shell company scheme for 8 years, the agent said. "Wire fraud involving 17 businesses. We have recordings, financial transfers, everything." The agent nodded to the AV team. The charity gala's main screen, which had been showing Cordelia's promotional video, switched abruptly to bank records. Offshore accounts. Emails between Cordelia and Robert. Her own words, recorded, broadcast to the entire room. "The waitress is perfect. Desperate. Disposable. No one will believe her over me. We can use her to destabilize him." The crowd gasped. Phones appeared. Cameras captured the moment from every angle. Within 2 minutes, the footage was live on social media. By the time agents handcuffed Cordelia, the video had been viewed 140,000 times. She wore a $15,000 gown. She cried black tears of mascara. She begged and bargained and finally simply broke, her ice-blonde composure cracking like porcelain dropped from a height. As agents led her toward the exit, she saw Salvatore standing in the shadows by the bar, watching with the expression of a man who had simply corrected an imbalance in the universe. He didn't smile. Justice had been served. That was enough. The morning light spilled through the apartment windows like honey, soft and gold and nothing like the darkness that had swallowed the last 3 months. Clara Santos sat on the edge of a bed that wasn't hers, in a room that smelled like lemon cleaner and foster care, and she couldn't move. Her hands shook. Her breath came shallow, like she was still drowning, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, still bracing for the moment someone would come through the door and take Micah away again. A knock. 3 sharp raps on the apartment door. She stood too fast, dizzy. Through the peephole she saw him. Salvatore Caruso stood in the hallway wearing a charcoal coat that cost more than everything she'd owned before the fire, and beside him was Carlo who had spent the last 2 weeks watching over her like a guardian carved from marble. Behind them, a woman in a navy suit held a leather folder. Clara opened the door. "Morning," Salvatore said. His voice was quiet, gentle like you'd use with someone who'd been hurt. "This is Victoria Chen. She's a family attorney. The best in Boston." Victoria extended her hand. "Ms. Santos, we have a lot of paperwork for you today." The papers came in stacks. Clara read them with her heart hammering against her ribs. The $200,000 debt, paid. All of it. Gone. The foreclosure notice, dismissed. Custody paperwork filed with the court, expedited, approved. A cease and desist order against every news outlet that had run Cordelia's story, her face, her shame. Every single one. "Robert is gone," Salvatore said. He stood by the window, not looking at her, just looking out at Boston waking up below them. "He left the city last night. There's a plane ticket with his name on it headed to Argentina. He won't come back. If he tries, the agreement we made will ensure he faces charges for everything. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Attempted extortion of a minor." Clara's legs felt weak. "Cordelia is in federal custody," Carlo added. He sat at the small kitchen table, and his size made the apartment feel even smaller. 40-year sentencing recommendation. She's facing 13 separate counts. The DA is building additional charges as they go through her financial records. "Why?" Clara's voice came out fractured, a whisper like wind through a crack. "You barely know me. You don't owe me anything." Salvatore turned from the window. His eyes held that same intensity she'd seen in the rain, that first night when his car had appeared like salvation in a storm. "You saved me," he said. "On the worst night of my life, you asked for nothing. Expected nothing. You saw a man bleeding and broken on a highway, and you just helped because you could. Do you understand how rare that is? I've built an empire of 200 men. Every single one wants something. Money. Power. Protection. They all want. You were the only one who just gave." "I need to see Micah," Clara said. "I know. The car is waiting." The foster home smelled like disinfectant and hope that never quite arrived. The case worker smiled and brought Clara paperwork to sign, and Salvatore waited in the lobby while Victoria explained custody transfers and legal protections. Clara's hand shook as she wrote her name. Micah. Micah was hers. Actually hers. Not borrowed. Not temporary. They let her into the playroom. Micah looked up from a wooden puzzle, his small face confused at first, then recognizing, then transforming into pure joy. He was 5 years old and small for his age, wearing clothes that belonged to someone else's childhood, and when he saw Clara he ran like she was oxygen and he'd forgotten how to breathe. She caught him, dropped to her knees and held him so tight her arms shook. He smelled like laundry detergent, the same brand her sister used to buy, and Clara pressed her face into his hair and let herself break. She broke quietly, silently, tears streaming down her face while she whispered, "I'm taking you home. Today. Right now. Forever." Micah cried into her shoulder. His small hands gripped her shirt. "You came back. You came back. You came back. I'll always come back," she whispered. Always. Through the window of the playroom, Salvatore watched. Carlo stood beside him, and after a long moment Carlo said, "Boss, you're getting soft." Salvatore didn't respond for a long time. Just watched Clara hold Micah like he was the only real thing in the world. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different. Stripped down. Raw. "Maybe I am," he said. "Or maybe I'm finally learning what's worth protecting." 1 week later. 6 in the morning. The diner was closed but alive with movement, contractors refinishing the checkered floor, installing new booths with clean vinyl seats that didn't split when you sat down. Salvatore had arranged it all, some kind of payment or gratitude or maybe just the quiet way powerful men took care of things that mattered. Clara wore new shoes. Real shoes, not the orthopedic ones with the broken heel. A fresh apron. Her hair was pulled back clean, and there was color in her face again. She stood behind the counter preparing for the morning shift, and Micah sat in a corner booth with his homework spread out in front of him, his tongue poking out in concentration, safe and home and entirely hers. The door opened. Salvatore Caruso entered alone. Carlo and Gino waited outside, visible through the windows, their presence a quiet statement about the importance of this moment. He sat at the counter. Clara poured coffee without asking. "How did you know how I take it?" she asked, and there was something almost like teasing in her voice, a lightness that hadn't existed before. I pay attention, he said. She set down the coffee pot. Her hands were steady now. I'm not what you think I am. I'm not brave or special. I'm just someone who got lucky that night. Someone who... You're exactly what I know you to be, Salvatore interrupted. His eyes met hers. Someone who shows up. Who does what needs doing. Who doesn't quit. He paused, and in that pause there was something fragile, something a man like him had probably never allowed himself to feel before. I spent 30 years building walls. Higher and higher. I swore after my father died that I would never be weak again. That I would never need anyone. That I would never let anyone in. You walked through those walls like they weren't even there. Clara listened. I'm not going to lie to you, he continued. I'm not a good man. My past is blood and silence and things I can't undo. But if you're willing, I want to be different going forward. For you. For Micah? Because you showed me that strength isn't walls. It's standing in the ashes and choosing to rebuild anyway. What happens now? Clara asked. Now you decide. I can walk away, leave you to your life, make sure you're protected but not involved. Or we can figure out what this is, together. No obligations. No debts. Just choice. Just us choosing each other, every day, the way you chose to help me on that highway. Clara looked over at Micah, bent over his math homework, safe and real and entirely part of her world now. She looked back at Salvatore, and for the first time in months she smiled. A real smile. A smile that came from the part of her that had learned to trust again. I choose trust, she said. The words hung in the quiet diner, in the smell of fresh coffee and new beginnings, in the morning light that didn't know anything about darkness or highways or desperate nights. She chose. Not because he was powerful or wealthy or could protect her, though he could do all those things. But because he saw her. Not as invisible. Not as nobody. But as someone worth choosing. Clara Santos learned that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or violence or control. It's showing up for someone on their worst night and asking nothing in return. Salvatore Caruso learned that the empire he built on vengeance was nothing compared to the strength it took to let someone in. To choose vulnerability with another person. To build something that wasn't made of walls and fear. They both learned that healing begins the moment we choose connection over fear. Every day we choose between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Between trusting and protecting ourselves. Every single day, that choice is waiting for us. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that one act of courage can change everything. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will remind you why hope matters, why showing up matters, why choosing trust in a broken world is the bravest thing any of us can do. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever helped someone without expecting anything back? What happened? We read every single comment, and your stories matter to us. We wish all of you good health, joy, and days filled with peace and happiness. After the rain, the sky always clears. Thank you for staying with us. We'll see you next time.